I'm really delighted to be here today again with Drew. We have talked several times about music, which is Drew's bailiwick. And Drew has a master's in ethnomusicology and is currently teaching music in Oman. So it's kind of late night for him right now and early morning for me. So we'll see how this goes.
Yep.
I'm hoping to talk to Drew not only about his new Substack, which is called Musica Apologia, but also about unity and multiplicity and about time and space and perception and memory and hearing and reason.
Great.
Um, all of which I hope leads us to talking about ratios and relationships, because I think all of that is kind of in this music space. And as you mentioned in your conversation with Brantley on Transposition podcast, um, there are all these different levels at which music resides. And of course, the bottom line question is what is music? And we probably won't get that answered today, but we can certainly look at some of these other things. So, welcome to the Meaning Code.
Nice to be back. Thanks,
Um,
Karen.
let's maybe start with this idea of you and I were having a conversation on Twitter about some stuff that you posted about the word melos. And I'm assuming melos has something to do with melody.
Yes, it's a Greek concept, still used today in the Byzantine world. Yeah, melos is essentially melody, anything with pitch in time. Um, and as the old Greek philosophers discussed it, um, melos is anything that's the harmonic relations between notes set to a beautiful melos. Melos is achieving the right balance and proportions and ratios in between notes to produce a harmonic sounding melody, kind of.
Harmonic sounding melody. That's an interesting combination.
Well,
We
the
typically
reason
think
the
of a
reason I say
harmonic
that,
as being the chords, and
right? So that's a good question. Thank you, softball. So the harmony, as we understand it today, is post-enlightenment. So the word harmony has taken on a meaning that it didn't have before. It was way broader. Uh, when the Greeks talked about harmony, they did not talk about stacking notes on top of each other. Um, so the element of music that we call harmony is what we've done is we've appropriated a term that used to mean something else, and now it's become the new, well, new, but the last couple centuries, that's what harmony has referred to. But harmony is, I mean, in the broadest sense, it's balance. Harmony was a Greek deity, Harmonia. And um, when uh, Plato and his predecessors talked about harmony in the cosmos, they were talking about proportion and balance. And when the first music theorists start getting into harmony, you're like Aristoxenus, for example, um, Ptolemy, um, Pythagoras, the the words for musical scales, we refer to musical scales. We would say that belongs to the element of melody. Oh, this melody is using this scale. But actually, one of the words for scale is harmoniae, because, well, how did they produce scales? A scale was a sequence of tones, um, balanced. Like, it's got a certain number of whole steps and half steps, and we balance out the numbers of whole steps and half steps to produce this scale. And so the thing that's harmonic in music is the relationships between notes in melody. It's actually a melodic concept. There's also harmony in rhythm, in the balance between the heavy stresses and the light stresses in the feet of poetic meters. So there's harmony there. So harmony is a much broader concept that then the Greek theorists and the philosophers and polymaths and that they observed that musical harmony those relationships and those ratios and those intervals corresponded with cosmic harmony. And so that's why they become the harmonicists. And that's why actually we talk about music of the spheres, but they didn't that phrase, music of the spheres, word for word, doesn't start until the Renaissance. In the original Greek, it's the harmony of the cosmos. That's actually the music of the spheres. The word is harmony there, not music. The word harmony precedes music. It comes before music. And then oftentimes Plato will go back and forth between talking about harmony and musica, the art of the muses. But the operative word that that we would call music was really harmony. Harmonia would be the theory of tones and their relationships.
The way you define that, the way that you describe it, it sounds almost the way that Dallas Willard talks about the soul.
Mm.
The soul, and he talks about every living thing having a soul, because the soul is that in the living thing which integrates and which makes everything work together. And
Mhm.
perhaps that in which all things consist, if you've heard that phrase before.
I like it.
Yes. So so it almost sounds as though harmony is integral to music, in that it kind of, whatever music is, that's at the heart of it. That's what holds all those ratios and relationships, or what holds everything together.
Um, yes, I would like to read a quote. So this is from Boethius, who I've been reading recently for a new article that I'm working on. And one of he's obviously famous for the Consolation of Philosophy, which I have
Mm-hmm.
some things to say about it. I'm not an expert on that text, but there's a few things that can be said there. But another one of his texts that's very relevant to me is he wrote a book called De Musica, Fundamentals of Music. Um, and here we go. I'd like to read this quote. It's a short one. What he does is he opens this book. The first chapter is really interesting. It's like this is the stuff that an ethnomusicologist would write. This is the stuff that a music psychologist would write. Um, it's observations about music in the world, its effects on people. Um, he gives like 15 examples of stories that have been transmitted from the Greek corpus. So, for example, Boethius relates how the Pythagoreans they would play the lyre at night using certain melodic modes to soothe the soul and go to sleep. And then when they woke up in the morning, they would play different melodic modes to wake them up, to energize them. Boethius relates stories of ancients, Terpenter and others healing people um, from illnesses through music. Um, there's stories about people who are in this fit of rage, this drunken stupor, and then a flute player changes how they're playing. They start playing what's called a spondi, which is a slower dance, and then that calms their soul and it gets them out of their stupor and it restores the harmony in their soul and their mind. Boethius um, comments that um, people of all ages and sexes, male, female, infants through adults, they all respond to the music. Boethius remarks that memory uh, like we involuntarily remember melodies and it just comes to us through our memory without even having, to hear it. And we move to music. And so he gives like 15 examples of all this. And then he says, but to what purpose is all this? So that there can be no doubt that the order of our soul and our body seems to be related somehow through the same ratios that are used to set pitches for suitable melody, joining together and unified. Okay, so uh, what he's trying to say here, he's making this argument that the reason we so resonate with music is that our soul and our body are unified. There's principles at work, and they would actually say mathematic ratios, but there's some structures and principles that are at work in the human person, in the soul, that unites body, soul, and mind, and that there's this equilibrium uh, that when we're experiencing good harmony, we are not agitated, but we're, you know, I mean, there's peace there, They describe all the different characteristics of what that means for the soul to be reharmonized, but that those same principles are musical principles. And Boethius is arguing, and he's basically saying the reason I'm writing this book is because the principles in music that organize music and those principles specifically that bring about suitable melody, which would be the word melos there, that bring about suitable melos. The principles of melos are the principles that realign, retune, reharmonize the soul, body, and mind.
Wow. Yeah, so I think Dallas Willard was onto something when he's thinking of the soul that way.
Yeah.
But it also reminds me of a conversation that I had probably a couple of years ago with Richard Watson, who is a theoretician of some sort in the sciences. He's a computer scientist. I think he's also in cognitive science and perhaps even in physics. He's a colleague of Michael Levin, who works in developmental biology. But Richard Watson has come up with this theory that since natural selection is not sufficient to explain Darwinian evolution, he came up with a theory that life evolved through music. And his very robust he has a very robust set of videos explaining his whole theory. It's quite complex and interesting. There's about 7 hours of his theory on YouTube.
Wow.
That I tried to coalesce into a conversation with him in 1 hour. So mainly I didn't ask him to summarize the theory, but just to answer some questions from me regarding the theory, since he already had the whole series out there. He went step by step through the whole theory over this 7.5 hours. And it has to do with harmonics and the way that things sort of fall into place. And he sees that falling into place like particles falling into a minima, and then seeking minima, always seeking minima. And I have to show you this thing. It reminded me a little bit of when you were talking with Brantley about what happens when scientists start trying to divide something up. If you're trying to look at music scientifically, I think you also talked about this in your article on the Substack, that you start cutting it apart into pieces, and it's not a very useful tool. And this is a little video about how to really take apart a pineapple. And I know this sounds silly, but I just have to show it to y'all.
Okay.
So I'm going to share my screen here. And hopefully I can find this video. Yeah, maybe not. This always happens to me when I try to do this. I, of course, lost my well.
I see it down there, shared with you, how to actually open a pineapple.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now you can
Hey,
see
stop. Take this pineapple. Watch this.
Okay.
I'm going to show you how to
So you can see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
really open a pineapple with your bare hands.
My bare hands. Maybe a bear's hands.
No. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take this stem. You're going to twist it and pull. Apparently this works. Yeah. Twist and pull. Boom.
What?
Step one done. Start kind of banging it on the ground with the bottom.
Like this?
Yeah, exactly. Now you want to do that for 25 minutes.
What? I'm not doing that.
I'm just kidding. Start rolling it, but with pressure, like you're giving it a massage. Yeah, nice and hard, like super hard, as hard as you can.
I know you're pranking me, bro.
No. I'm telling you. No, it's going to blow your mind. See these stems?
Uh-huh.
You're going to be able to just pull them out one by one. Watch.
Just yank it out.
Yeah, watch.
It's still pretty. Oh,
There you go.
What?
See,
That
watch.
is dope.
You just pull it out.
What?
Boom.
Yo, that's actually sick.
Isn't that crazy? Hey, stop, stop, stop. Take this pineapple. Watch.
So what I take that to mean is that there just is a way things are. Now we are scientists. We're going to take a knife and cut the top off, and then we're going to slice the slice the peeling off, and then we have to cut out all those little eyes and everything. But the way things are, it perfectly natural for a human being or an animal to be able to open that thing up and find a way to eat it. And the old wisdom that you're reading now from these guys, they had a way of looking at music that was looking at it as a whole thing,
Yeah.
and then able to take look at the parts, but look at the parts in reference to the whole, rather than just slicing off the parts that they want and discarding everything else.
Yes. That's a brilliant illustration. And Karen, I do want to say, I think you, uh, so the Sufi Inayat Khan, I talk about him a lot. He talks a lot about people who are musical in themselves. Um, Inayat Khan wrote, so he used to play an instrument called the veena, and he loved playing music, but then he changed his instruments. He stopped playing music altogether because he said his instrument was people, his instrument was the world, um, and he talks about someone who is truly musical in their character and in their speech and in their thoughts. Um, that there's something like first for one thing that they're able to see the harmony in everyone and everything, and sort of manifest that harmony and how they relate with people and things like that. And I see your project, Karen, as an extremely musical project in that way, where you are harmonizing sciences and uh, arts and music and all sorts of things. And so, anyways, just bringing in this pineapple video, I think is another. You're a very musical person in doing that, Karen.
Well, it's a strange thing. Sometimes people say, well, it's just the algorithm, but it really does seem as though every time I'm going to be talking to somebody, the algorithm brings me something like that to me just fits. Maybe it wouldn't fit to anybody else, but for me, it's like, oh, that's why I saw the pineapple video this morning. So let's get back to this whole thing about the part and the whole. And I guess a pineapple is a good illustration about that, because there are all these parts to a pineapple. And the pineapple obviously relates to phi and the Fibonacci sequence and all the patterns and everything that are in a pineapple. But when you're talking about Aristoxenus and this whole idea of melody, one of the things that you quoted to me was that Aristoxenus critiques the notion that a melody is simply a sequence of intervals. Melos is so much more than that, and to gain melic understanding, one must understand how each note functions in relation to the whole. And with that word functions, you had air quotes on it, and you had put in this word dynamis or dunamis, which turns out to be related to the Greek word dunamos in the New Testament. How does dunamis relate to function?
Thanks for reminding what I said, because I honestly forgot, and now it's all coming back to me. So Aristoxenus, the 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 trailblazing thing that he did was we're not just going to study music intervals by. So I think the way they did, I could be wrong, but I think the way um, they used to transcribe a melody would be, let's say, from left to right, we're just going to write down the intervals. So like if I were to write the melody to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, instead of writing out a notation, I might write it out as like unison, unison, ascending fifth, unison, ascending whole step, unison, descending whole step. And I would write that out linearly as a mathematical code kind of a thing. And when I read Aristoxenus, I feel like that's what he's trying to say is, oh, we can't just write down a melody just by writing down its intervals and things like that. We need to, if we really want to understand a melody, we need to understand which notes in the melody are the key players, which notes are telling the story, which notes are generating the motion, right? Because you don't actually, just from reading strict code like that, you don't get a sense for tonality, you don't get a sense for functionality. And so functionality in modern music theory, the most a basic example of this is called the leading tone. The leading tone is the seventh note of a major scale, do re mi fa sol la ti do, and then at the very end you sing the ti do. Ti is the leading tone, and it goes back to do. That's what the song says, right?
Mhm.
And so we would call that a function. So ti has this function; it leads back to do. And Aristoxenus, what's interesting is um, that word dunamis, or I don't know how to say it, dunamis. Like it also can mean like power or potential. Um, and so I think what Aristoxenus was trying to get at with that word, with the function or the dunamis or the power of a note is what are each individual note's capabilities? What are its powers? What are its possible uses? What are its web of associations in the whole? And so if you think of a scale again, well, a G major scale, the note G has a lot of powers and uses and functions, and the note E has its own set of powers and functions. And when E is juxtaposed against a C, or when E is juxtaposed against a D, those are two different relationships. But within the tonality of G, you you well, let me back up. Within the G major scale, you can have a variety of fourths. For example, G to C is a fourth, A to D is a fourth, B to E is a fourth, and then D back to G is a fourth. So there's lots of fourths that happen in the G major scale. But what Aristoxenus is saying is, as a melody unfolds in time, no two fourths mean or feel the same thing. They,
Mhm.
they have different powers. They have different functions, right? So that's sort of what he's getting at.
So it reminds me of in painting, one of my teachers told me early on, we don't paint things, we paint relationships. And when he first said that, I had no idea what he was talking about. I was a new painter. I was thinking, well, does that mean if I'm painting figures, I want to make sure that the figures relate to each other in a certain way, but once I drilled down and I understood what he was really talking about, it's not it can be the relationships of the things that are in the frame. It can be that. And it can be the relationship between the finished painting and the viewer. It can be the relationship between the painter and the work. But if you really drill down, it's the relationship between red and orange. It's the relationship between a small stroke of paint and a large one. It's a relationship between a smooth section and a textured section of the canvas. It's the relationship between large and small. It's every relationship that you can imagine. And if I could just read a quote here from a guy by the name of Jonathan Biss, who is a concert pianist.
Okay.
He said something really fascinating, and he's also quoting somebody else named Leon Fleischer. So it's a couple of quotes embedded in one another. The interpretation of Mozart is neither mechanical reproduction nor unfettered creativity. It's about using your eyes and ears and lived experience and education and critical lens and passion and skepticism, and above all, humility to tease out the text's infinite implications, and in doing so, to come closer to its essence. Speaking about Mozart's K467 concerto, the great pianist Leon Fleischer once said, "It can never be beautiful enough. It will always be more perfect in the imagination. A performance of a work by Mozart will never be perfect, but a life devoted to making it more perfect is a life well spent. A process requiring honesty and modesty, an ongoing restless quest for an understanding that acknowledges the ambiguities inherent in a great text or a great work of art. With that devotion, these works shape and reshape our consciousness. Without it, they are mere paper or canvas. But that made me think not only about all the different kinds of relationships, but it made me think about, like what you're saying there about these fourths, that every fourth is a different fourth depending on the context that it's in. And so let's say someone hears this Mozart K467 concerto on a day when everything is going great. And then 6 months later, they hear it again on a day when they're suffering with something. That change of context is going to massively change how that piece of music sounds to that person. Or if you're a symphony conductor, you might see something entirely different in that piece of music than another conductor would see. And so you're going to emphasize different parts of it. And so there are relationships on so many different levels. So throw that back at you.
That's yeah, I love that. There's all sorts of connections that I was making too with some other references. So like Inayat Khan again, he he's he would say that that same principle of harmony is in art, is in architecture. He says he sees music in all of these other art forms. Um, I also thought about there's a Sufi concept of when when you do when they do their sama ritual. Sama is Sufi music, singing hymns and chants and ritual dancing and things like that. That there's three elements that you need for the sama ritual to be effective. And in other words, what does it mean for you effective? In order for your soul to achieve like oneness with God as a result of the ritual, you need three things. You need the right time, the right place, and the right people. And so, if any one of those elements isn't there, then the conditions aren't there for your soul to have that that union with God, in worship with others. And that gets back to your point about context and about um, depending on the state of my soul in any one condition or even the time of day or place, um, where I am, who I'm with, if it's in a concert hall or if it's, with my headphones at home, those are all different variables that go into this soul thing that we're talking about, you know.
So you go on in this thing about melody to say that a single note might have many dunamis depending on its context in the melody. This is all in accordance with Aristoxenus' belief that the study of music is the study of things in the process of coming to be, relying on memory to fix what has been compared,
Yes.
to fix what has been compared to what will be, to what is or to what will be. And so later on, you talk about memory and perception, that memory fixes what has been, and perception is observing what will be, or how does that work?
I'm not a phenomenologist, so I couldn't tell you how it works. It just does. He's I mean, Aristoxenus is making, I mean, this is thousands of years ago we're talking, and he's making this observation that people still go to that they find amazing about what what makes music a distinct art form. And this memory thing is key. And this is a couple of years ago when you and I were talking, I would talk a lot about time, like that time perception.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what this is. That's what this is. It's things in the process of becoming, right? Jeremy Begbie, the great theomusicologist, I think it's in his book, Time, Music, Time, and Modernity, or something like that, where he says like a melody is a transtemporal object. Like a melody, if it's an object, it's the thing that it doesn't exist in any one time. It exists across time, right? And it's, well, that's really interesting. Um, how is that object, the melody, um, where Brantley asked me the question, what world does music inhabit? So what does that melody inhabit? Where does it come from? What does it help us do? What does that afford to us? Why is that interesting to us that it seems like we've taken this thing that humans can do, which is to remember and to predict, and music as an art form, it takes that capacity. And I think I've heard Neil deGrasse and others talk about, well, we also want to have surprise in there, right? Like a good melody isn't so predictable. I think you've even said this in a conversation we had, where uh, a good composer will establish repetition to set up our expectations, and then just slightly surprise us. And the art in the way they cause that surprise, this is that unity and variety, right? So we establish the repetition that cultivates unity. We perceive the unity in the unfolding of a song. What we're first doing, our brain is trying to categorize and put things into chunks that we can grasp. Um, the longer a melody is, the harder it is to hear the chunks, and we call these phrases. Um, and so what music does is it sort of that surprise factor. I think it was the Daniel Levitin. He wrote the "This Is Your Brain on Music." I think he has a bit where he talks about there's actually a thing in your brain. It's like, think about children, like babies and infants and toddlers, like they love surprise games, right? And
Mhm.
we still do that with this setting up an expectation, and then something else happens that defied our expectation, and then something in our brain like loves that. And so that's all wired into how composers weave good melodies and things like that. But there's so much more built into that memory piece, like songs as an aid to memory, using songs to remember stories, to remember long stories. Like the epics of Homer are long memorized recitations, and they would have been sung. They would have been, that was how you would perform and remember them. Um, and there's a verse in the Bible that always comes to my mind on this topic, in Deuteronomy. Like God, he tells Moses, he says, they're going to forget me, they're going to forget my ways, but they are not going to forget this song. So teach them this song.
Hmm.
And I'm like, gosh, that is so interesting. What is that? And so I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that means, but there's something there. There's a there. And then the final piece here is, in this piece that I'm writing, I spent a lot of time on the muses, just thinking about who are the muses and what they represent. And yeah, there's a lot here. Sorry. So the muses, they're daughters of Zeus, and their mother's name is Memory. Like the goddess, her name is Memory.
Mhm.
It's I can't say her name correctly, but it's where we get the word mnemonic from, like a mnemonic device. Like that's her
Mhm.
name is
Mhm.
Numina. Anyways, so poets, um, they are so indebted to the muses. And so we get this core myth from Hesiod in Theogony. It's the first thing Hesiod says. It's all about the muses. In fact, the total Theogony is like 1,000 lines. The first 100 or so are just about the muses. It's like he's using a lot of ink just on this group of deities, when the whole thing is supposed to be about the whole cosmos and all the deities put together. It's like at least like a tithe of Theogony is
Mhm.
given to the muses. And all poets do this, and all there's always there's always what I think they're called proem. It's the opening, the intro, the opening lines are usually dedications to the muses and things like that. Well, Hesiod gives his story as to sort of why that is. It says he was a shepherd, herding sheep on, I forget, Mount Helicon. And then the muses visit him, and uh, they give him two things. They give him a rod, like a staff, and they give him, they breathe into him and give him the voice to sing, and specifically the voice to be able to sing about the gods, about things past and things in the future, um, but ever to sing of the muses first and last. And so the poet is so indebted to the muses for this. Now, Hesiod and Homer, you get a lot from them about the relationship between the poet and the rhapsode, the reciter, the bard with the muses. Um, One of the things that you see, especially in Homer and all the poets, is they rely on the muses for memory. They rely on the muses for knowledge. Before Plato, before philosophy, when the world was just poetic, like that's how knowledge was transmitted through poetry. This is in the Greek world I'm talking. Um, all knowledge, anything that was worth written down was going to be in sort of poetry form. So history and astronomy, um, this is all wound up in this poetry thing. And poetry wasn't just spoken, it was sung. So you have this, the scholars call it the musico-poetic tradition. It's not either or, it's this both and
Mhm.
conglomerate, complex whole thing. And so what you see in Homer is like he's about to, in the Iliad, he's going to recite, he's about to launch into reciting the catalog of ships, and it's this lengthy catalog of all of the Greeks who are about to go to war against the Spartans or against the Trojans, and uh, and that's a really long list of people. And he sets it up. He's like, oh, there's so many people. There's no way you could recount them. And then he breaks into this really lengthy uh, prayer, basically to the muses, asking to remember, saying like, you were there, I was not there, and essentially what you get is this idea that in the muses is all knowledge, and the bard and the poet relies on the inspiration of the muses for the knowledge that they themselves don't have, but the muses provide it to them. And then what happens is that knowledge is then in the poem, and then the poet dies, and then centuries later, the poet's work is recited by a rhapsode, right? And the rhapsode, the reciter, is channeling this knowledge that was inspired by the poet. And there's this inspiration that's sort of going all the way down. And it was in his process of me learning about this that the word inspiration, it literally means to breathe into, like inspire, inspire.
Mhm.
And so anyway, so there's a lot there on music and memory. That's an observation that we've been making for thousands of years. You see it in the Bible, you see it in the Greeks, you see it in all sorts of civilizations.
Well, I also think there's some way in which memory works not only backwards, but forwards. And I don't quite understand this, but it's as though there's a, when you're singing a melody, if you're intuiting a new melody, let's say you're trying to build a song. So there seems to be some sort of a yearning that's moving forward, a yearning for something that is both familiar and unexpected. And the word that comes to me is that word that C.S. Lewis used to talk about, Sehnsucht. He got it from some other philosopher, but it's a German word that means this kind of a yearning for what we don't yet know, which we see a little bit in the cycles of the seasons. When spring isn't quite here yet, but we're yearning for spring, and we kind of know what it's going to be because it's been here before, but it's always something new. And he often talked about how we have this built-in yearning for heaven, which to him was a proof that heaven exists, because we wouldn't have a yearning for something that didn't exist. And it seems to me there's something like that going on with music. And especially if it's a song that we've heard before, but maybe we're not so familiar with it, if we start to sing it, our voice almost begins to seek the space where that next note is going to be and then fall into the spot. And when it comes, it's like, oh, yes, I knew that's what it was, you know? And it generates this sense of wonder and surprise and complexity all at the same time as we're singing. I think that's what's great about really great melodies, is that they have that capacity.
Totally. Um, yeah, there's a lot of depth to what you're saying here. Um, Melody, well, okay, so the first thing that came to my head was the bridge. Like in a lot of verse, chorus, bridge songs, modern pop songs, and in a lot of contemporary Christian worship songs. Um, a lot of songs are structured towards, once you get to the bridge, that's that special transitional section in the song. It's usually like, even though it's not the chorus is the main part of the song. There's still this like anticipation for what's coming in the bridge, and usually the bridge, ritualistically, we've sort of we sort of wired the bridge to be the moment of ecstasy. Like um, that's what bridges have come to be in contemporary Christian music and in a lot of just songs in general, whether they're in church or out of church. And so, right, so the verse is one theme, is one melody, right? The chorus is a different melody. Sometimes it's the same melody, but usually those are two different melodies, right? And then the bridge is a third thing. And so we get the unity in the verses because they share the same melody with each other, but the variety is in the words. The text changes from verse to verse, but the melody stays the same. The chorus is like a B theme, and it's juxtaposed with the first melody. And we also know that the chorus is sort of what's supposed to be the song, is what it's about. It's the heart of the song. And we're always interplaying between verse and chorus. And so there's this sort of dance relationship, this binary relationship between the verse and the chorus, and that sets up the gosh, I'm having planet orbits in my head right now because I've just been like reading about that a little bit. But that sets up this relationship, this binary star thing, or I don't know. I can't think of the right analogy here, but there's a gravitational magnetic going back and forth between verse and chorus. And then now we have this pattern, right? Once you have a pattern set, what you're now free to break the pattern and then surprise. And when you have too much of a pattern, suddenly you start to expect that there's something new that's going to be coming soon, and that's enter the bridge at that point. And you've already spent a couple of cycles of verses and choruses, probably at different dynamics. The text is usually getting richer over the course of the song. When you go back to the chorus and revisit those same words, it's like what the chorus does is, even though the verses are changing along the way, the chorus, because it's the same text and the same melody both times, like you're grounded in this other thing that's like, this is always stable the entire song. And so that chorus gives you that stability, and it unites the whole song together. And then, the verses are sort of telling you the story along the way. And then you get to this bridge. And then usually how we use a bridge and how it's done, it's a short motif that's repeated a bunch of times to generate excitement and to build essentially ecstasy and release. And then it's finally resolved when you go back home to the chorus again. That's always where a bridge connects you to. It goes back home. It connects you back to the chorus. And then that final chorus, or that chorus that comes right after the bridge, there's a new meaning there once you're in the chorus at the end of the journey. once you're back home again, following this peak, this mountaintop bridge, there's a new understanding of that chorus. There's a new experience of that chorus that you didn't have before the bridge. And so that bridge gives the chorus this newness and sameness at the same time.
Well, one of the things I was thought quite curious about the quote from Aristoxenus is this idea that memory fixes what has been compared to what will
Yeah.
be. And of course, my first thought is that fix just means like you would fix something in concrete. You set it in concrete. But the way you're talking now, it also has this meaning of fix. It repairs it in some way, or it transforms it in some way. It fixes it. Like as you said before, a piece of music can actually help to repair a person, transform them psychologically, spiritually. When David would play the harp for King Saul,
Yes.
it would bring him peace. It would fix something in him, because
Yes.
in the same way that when children learn to play the piano, they're learning a new mathematical language that's actually wiring something together in their brains. So
Okay, yeah.
music has two sides of fixing.
So the word that's coming to my mind is habituation. The way music does this is we become habituated to the patterns that start. Music doesn't usually heal instantly. You have to settle
Mhm.
into it. You have to
Mhm.
open yourself up to it. There's this like the flower has to open up, there's this like the heart has to soften, right? There's this surrender process that a good song will help you do. Um, this is where my buddy Brantley and I would talk about coercion. Does the music coerce you to do that or not? But um, when Aristoxenus talks about fixing what has been, I would just interpret that as he's simply saying that note happened, and now
Mhm.
it's in the back of your mind, and now here's a new note,
Mhm.
and you're hearing these two in relationship with each other, past, present,
Mhm.
and now there's this future thing. There's this predictive thing. So we have past, present, and future all coalescing in this one moment. I think philosophers called that the infinite now, something like that. Something like where the now moment is in this relationship with past and future at the same time, and somehow in song form and music form, we're able to take time and present it into this thing. Like I still can't think of a good word to describe what that is, but the reason, I mean, the means of music is this habituation where first, I'll use a different tradition. So like drumming, like African drumming, or first there's a pattern that happens, and it's a brand new pattern. And once you've figured out that pattern enough, once it's cycled through enough times, then you're less attentive to it because the surprise factor is gone. There's all sorts of bioevolutionary reasons for why that is. When you hear a new sound, it's like, oh, what is that? Like your fight or flight sort of senses go off. When you hear a strange sound, it's like you really want to figure out what that is. Once you know what it is, then it's sort of like it's still there. Your ears are still processing it, but then like you know, the part of your brain, like it's able to go to a back burner, let's say. And then something new enters in. And now we're doing this layering thing. And so that process, I think I've read people call that process habituation. We become habituated to this first pattern that's been introduced. Now a new pattern's coming in, and now we can add the layers. And it's in that experience of the layers that's where at least in Western music, where we have polyphony and we have this like uh, seven-layer dip of a rock band idiom or all sorts of things that we're doing that there's so much happening at the same time that it is very cosmic. Like you can see why, like I was just studying Saturn the other day, randomly it came up, and its rings and its moons and its own orbital axis and revolution, and then its relationship with other planets in the solar system, let alone within the galaxy, right? that these are all simultaneous, this polyphony that's still harmonious. Like the reason we have a solar system is because it's been finely tuned. Like
Hmm.
that's a musical argument, the fine tuning of the universe. Um, that you can see how, and I just dropped this on Brantley in my in my chat with him. What if what if what if the music of the spheres had an inverted framing? Like what if we had the spheres of music? And so when we're singing this song, we're singing this hymn in church, and what if it does get to that layer, whether the layers come from the band or the layers come from a choir singing in three-part harmony, like all of those layers coming together with this with one heart. Hearts are softened over time, and it's like we're bringing the stars in with us. It's like we're singing the song of the stars, or the stars are joining us in this
Hmm.
praise to God,
Hmm.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Um, in my own little bandwagon is that that lovely thing that happens when the music becomes part of you, so that when the melody and the harmony become a part of you, so that that's fixed in the back of the mind, then when the words come, it's much easier to integrate the words and memorize
Yeah,
them and carry them with you day after day after day. Where to my ear, so much of the modern worship music that's being brought into the church never settles in the back of your mind to where you can
settle. Yeah.
remember. I have to write down a phrase from the song so that I can memorize the phrase. Yesterday, my phrase that I memorized was, so we seek his face and not his hands.
Mm.
And I thought that was a great phrase, but I will not remember the melody of the music at all because it was not memorable. But I don't want to go down that pathway. But the thing I do want to say about what you were just saying is you're talking about what was past and what is to come. So when we think about a melody or even the harmony, the way that they used to know it or the way we know it today with a chord, is it possible at any point to take a snapshot of music in the same way that we can take a snapshot of what you're moving through life or you're looking at a waterfall? You can take a snapshot of it and
Oh,
catch it
yeah.
at a moment in time. You
Yeah.
can look at it. But I don't think music is that way. I don't
No,
think
it's
you can
not.
take a moment in time, even with a chord.
This is exactly right. Uh, the scene of a movie that comes to my mind is Interstellar, and there's a scene where uh, one of the characters says, these beings who gave us this wormhole, right? For them, time is a three-dimensional, space, something like that, like trans-temporal beings, you would need to live in a four-dimensional world in order to take that snapshot of music because time is this other element that's so crucial to its nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, even if you think just about a chord or one note, let's just think about one
Yeah.
note. That note in a moment of time would be nothing. You wouldn't hear, you wouldn't be able to perceive anything because
Right, right, right.
the
So
note
there's this,
depends upon the
uh-huh.
the overtones. It depends upon the sostenuto of the tone. All of
Yeah.
those things are.
And if you're properly tuning those notes, now this is the Western system. If you are like, because I teach concert band, and at least at the university level or advanced high school level, like you are teaching kids that to be in tune is not to get that tuner needle in the middle on all of your notes, because tuning is actually a balancing act. So the note C needs to be tuned a certain way if the chord is a C chord. But if it's an A minor chord, that note C, you have to change the tuning of that note C to make the chord in tune. And so we call that just intonation, because the piano is a balancing act. We call it equal temperament. It's Pianos are not in tune. They're actually not in tune. It's as in tune as you can possibly get it, so you can play in all 12 keys. That's why it was invented. But it's actually not perfectly in tune, the intervals. It's logarithmic. It's not well, Pythagorean. So what you can do with an ensemble that you can't do with a piano is you can, uh, through teaching listening and through just math, helping helping the musicians know, oh, I'm playing the third of the chord there. So that means I need to tune it down a few cents so that we ring. And I did this in my wind ensemble in college. We played there's a piece of, oh, I love it. It's an arrangement of Bach's organ. It's called Fugue à la Gigue. And when a wind ensemble plays that last chord with this just intonation, and everyone, you know exactly how to bend the note to get it precisely in tune on that very last chord. I think it's a B flat major chord. It sounds like an organ. Like it just sounds like this beautiful resonant sound.
Mm.
You wouldn't know you were listening to a band, of trumpets and saxophones and things like that.
Well, I was having this conversation with my daughter the other day. She's working on a master's in music, and she was helping out with a band, and that band director keeps the tuning note running through all the practices.
Oh, wow.
And I said, that's very different than we did when I was young. Because when I was young, we would tune up at the beginning of a song in practice, later on for a concert as well. But then he was teaching us to listen to each other and to not to fall to the lowest common denominator, not to tune into the person who's sliding down in their key, but to tune into each other in a way that we're sort of, in my mind, we're doing what you were describing right there, finding that place where throughout the song there's going to be different connections that are taking place with intervals in the band. And so we learned how to listen to each other throughout the music rather than listening to
Yes.
something that was trying to
Yes.
hold us on a certain pitch.
Right. Yes. And yeah, and all of this is, as you said, relationships and context. And it's empirical. It's not like it's not scientific. It's very empirical, but it's also relative. It's like this funny thing where it's like the subjective perception and the context, which is sort of the thing of anthropology and sociology, does meet the math. It's like these two sides are really coalescing in this aspect.
Well, when you direct a band, how do you keep everybody in key?
I teach small school, mostly middle school, and if I'm lucky, I get to keep a few kids in high school. So
Mm-hmm.
I mostly like, yeah, I'm like, okay, here's your tuning pitch, and let's just try not to play the wrong notes and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I I don't have any special answer to this one. I don't teach, a super advanced wind ensemble kind of program, but I, I will say this though. Um, the music teaching, when I'm in the moment with my students, um, I'm the kind of teacher that can just get so stuck on the drill and kill of just the reps, the reps, the reps, um, that I'll sort of forget to step back and put the meaning back into context. But when I'm away from my students, I will reflect and I'll have some thoughts. And so one of the thoughts that I've had is how the process of becoming a musician, it's probably similar in many other things, but the process of becoming a good musician is this revelatory process. Um, so I think about the very first moment a student tries to make a sound on a clarinet or a trumpet or a violin, like the very first, this is my first time touching the instrument. How am I going to make a sound? And it's always this process of, um, how do I say this? Discovery. It's a revelatory process. Like they have to go through this journey that's uncomfortable to figure out exactly what my embouchure needs to do, what my lips need to do, what my air needs to do, what my hands need to do, what my posture needs to do. And these are all, it's just lots of fine-tuning adjustments, like you blow once, there's no sound. Okay, well, let's tweak this. Okay, you blow again, there's no sound. Okay, let's tweak this. You blow this. Okay, let's spread up the embouchure here. Okay, try the tongue placement. Sing E, do ooh, da. Okay, like flutes, you got to do this, we and then two, get this right embouchure. And then finally, after all that, they get this one like spark of a sound. Bah, it's like a squawk maybe, or and they're so delighted that they got anything. You know what I mean? Um, and then finally, and it's after the days and the weeks become months, and then the months become years, where you go from learning hot cross buns to learning full melodies to learning full arrangements to learning Bach over this time. To bring it back to the fine tuning of the universe. You know what I mean? It's like, oh well, if any one of those variables wasn't there, none of this would have happened. And so, but there was this absolute ideal that was always there. Like the potential was always there. They just needed to bring themselves in alignment with finding where that true beauty exists. Like they
Mhm.
had to figure out where it was, and when it was there, then they can experience it. And that I consider that a kind of a revelatory process.
Well, I think I actually think that's the process of everything. It's not just the process of learning an instrument. It's the process of painting a painting for sure. Stroke by stroke, you're going through that same process. It's the process of um, basically it's the process of learning how to brush your teeth, or
Yeah,
process of learning how to live your life, the learning how to walk so that you don't fall over when you walk off a curb. Or I mean, every single thing is like that, where there because there is a thing that is, there is a way that is.
you're
And
right.
our job
Yes,
is to find that way that is. And that is
yes,
that longing. There's a little bit of that longing piece that is seeking the truth, or seeking to
yes.
meet the ideal, that is a part and parcel of every single thing that we do in life. And I think that's also how the particles actually come together to make things. And that's how the cells come together in the body to develop the organs, and all of that comes together to make a final organism. I think everything is that little bit of longing to get to what that ideal is. I think that's exactly what's happening.
That's what I wanted to say. You said it even better. Yeah.
Well, I just want to play. Do you have a minute for me to play a real short thing for you from
Yeah, sure.
oh, okay. So this is well, yeah, let's see if I again if I can find it. It's it's Nathan Jacobs' podcast. And yeah, I had it all queued up and something happened. All those things that I had queued up, I honestly don't know what happened. But so I'm not going to be able to find it this time. Maybe I can find it next time. But anyway, on his podcast, he has this thing about the complexity cascade. And it's just a brilliant piece about how, and he uses music as his example all the way through the whole podcast, about how complexity develops. And it's
Yeah.
exactly along the lines of what you were saying. I really wish that I had everything queued up and ready to go, and then it all fell away.
You can put it in the description though.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description so people can see it, because it was a
That sounds
really
great.
tricky thing.
Yeah, it
And
sounds
then
great.
one other thing, if we still have time, I wanted to talk to you about hearing and reason.
Okay.
You said through hearing, we assess the magnitudes of intervals, and through reason, we apprehend their functions. And this is from it was a book that you were reading, and you had posted screenshots of the paragraphs.
Yeah.
Taken in context, it says, taken as a whole, Our science is concerned with all musical melody, both vocal and instrumental. Its pursuit depends ultimately on two things, hearing and reason.
Yes.
Through hearing, we assess the magnitudes of intervals, and through reason, we apprehend their functions. That it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning in terms of what a function is, its power or its potential. But how do you see hearing and reason working out in that?
I think that was still Aristoxenus, or that was Aristides Quintilianus. It's one of those two. Maybe it was Quintilianus. So they had a project. So let's call that the merger of logos and melos.
Hmm.
Um, the Pythagoreans and that and the harmonicists and the math cult is a logos centric sort of frame where number is the through line through existence, and all we need is the numbers. Like the numbers are essential. Like that's at bottom is what we're talking about. But then the melos, when you actually give melody its due, when you give the music its due, the sound and our experience of it, and what makes a beautiful melody, and when you start to systematize that and you sort of bring that logos into the melos, um, that is, yeah, that mu music straddles both, as many other things do. I so KJ, forget his name on X, Commendium. So he
Yes,
he does all
yeah.
he does all these graphs and stuff,
Hmm.
and he's been working on his own uh, taxonomy of music, and I offered some thoughts, and then and he asked me, "Oh, what do you mean by that?" And so I'm like, "Okay, well, let me just go write it out." And so I wrote out my own taxonomy of music, and it's actually been an image that's been in my head for a long time. I just never put it in paper. Um, and this logos plus melos thing. So the reason I say, I'm a music teacher who doesn't know what music is because it's not this one-dimensional thing, right? If it's logos and it's melos, well, there's a lot to talk about there. And for the ancients and for the scholastics and for Boethius and for the medieval educational system, like to study music was not like the lowest level of music was to be a great performer of an instrument. That was the lowest level of being a musician, like according to this theory. Uh, Boethius says that, and he gets this from Plato, actually. Plato says this, where like the musician who doesn't have an understanding about the rational principles of what's going on and doesn't have this cosmic sort of through line connection to like doesn't know the why or the meaning of what's going on, that person, if all they are is just someone who's great at their instrument, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but this is what they said. They said that that person is no better than a slave of their craft. They're no better than an artisan, and I'm always so surprised, like back in Tunisia, every time we'd visit a Roman site, we'd see like, we'd either read a sign or a tour guide would say something like, because there's mosaics everywhere in the ancient Roman world. There's beautiful mosaics. But the people who made those mosaics were not highly regarded people. These were not works of art that would go into a museum. These were, they were nameless nobodies who made the mosaics. It wasn't considered this dignified thing to be a mosaicist. It is today. And so the musician who the only thing they know about music is how good they are at singing or playing an instrument that's the lowest level of musician, better than a mere artisan at that point. And so there's more levels to knowing music. And so Boethius says the true musician, that top level true musician is someone who like let's just go back to that framing, who knows the logos and the melos, sort of together. And that's why music becomes part of the quadrivium, in the classical education system. Like there's the seven liberal arts and sciences that anyone who would get a higher education, it was grammar, rhetoric, and logic, the trivium, and then the quadrivium was astronomy, math, uh, geometry, and music. Like music's just in there, and it's because of this sort of cosmic thing. So in my today, it's even more complex than that. It's not even just the math. It's obviously on one side, it's this physics, particle physics that you'll have to keep talking about. I don't know anything about. But then it's also anthropology and sociology. Like we now have these lenses today where we are, in my conversation with Brantley, we talked about the C.S. Lewis meditation in a tool shed, where it's this beam of light coming into the tool shed. And there's this difference between looking at the light and looking along the light. And well, what a field like anthropology tries to do is look at the experience of looking along. It's like, how can we help other people understand what it's like for someone on the inside who's looking along? Like, we'll never be able to see, like, I'll never be able to step inside a Hindu shoes, or I'll never be able to step inside the shoes of, or the sandals of, someone living in the Amazon jungle, right? But a field worker who goes and lives with them for 2 years, takes copious notes, recordings, interviews, learns the language, learns the customs, and then they can do some of that work for us, right? And that's what they try to do with their monographs. They try to help outsiders get a taste of that experience of looking along, what it might be like to be on the inside. And we do this with literature all the time, of course. So anyways, with music, there's a lot there that needs to be answered for. And so, um, truly understand music in my model, um, there's transcendence, and that's what this music of the spheres thing is trying to do, where music transcends its mere category of sound. It scales up and out into all reality, and that's where harmony is, and that's where time is. And so far, I can't come up with anything else. Harmony and time are the two transcendent elements of music, because harmony applies to melody, and it applies to rhythm, and it applies to all sorts of things. And then time, as we've talked about, is so essential for that memory piece and for our experience of setting up the patterns and things like that. But then in the anthropology, ethnomusicology, sociology side, so that goes up. That's a vertical thing. That's from the sound out. But then I'm borrowing one of their terms, the deep structures. So you have surface structures, which would be the sound, and then you have the deeper structures underneath the sound. And so in sociology or in anthropology, a deep structure are, I mean, to put it crudely, what's going on inside the heads of the people making the stuff. Why does the architecture look like that? Well, those are deeper structures in the culture, in the zeitgeist, in the cosmology, in the religion, in the things that aren't just in one person, but as a people, and then their people from across time, this cumulative, intangible cultural heritage. There's deep structures there that are intangible, but they arise to the surface in these tangible forms. And so to study music, you have to do this from the sound up to the transcendent, and then from the sound down to the depths of those deep structures. On either end of that is ineffability. Because if you're talking about the spirituality of a people or the values of a people, you're talking about some ineffable things. It eventually takes you that far, and it always takes you to some religion. It takes you to some point of transcendence that even they can't articulate. You're not supposed to. That's ineffable. And then on the other direction, going up to the transcendence thing, you reach ineffability too. So on both ends, on both poles, it's ineffability. So in the center of my model, this flat line is the sound. That's the pure physicality of sound waves.
Mm-hmm.
And we process sound waves with mind. Music theory and organizing sounds and our ability to like hear a melody and organize those pitches, and those are mental procedures. So music theory, like a crude way of defining it, is the way the mind organizes sounds. Like that could be one way of explaining. So I categorize the elements of music as ways of organizing. So that's my left axis, and then my right axis are all the other modes of attention that could be born to brought on observing things about music. So the closer you are to the real sound is acoustics, the field of acoustics. I can study music acoustically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then maybe the next level up would be like physics. And then somewhere in there, there's biology and there's neurochemistry and there's all sorts of other things too. Um, so the total complex whole of music and what it means to know music is to include the data from that full circle of things. And that's the whole web of relationships that we've been talking about in this conversation about the necessity for meaning arising from the relationships of things. Yeah.
Wow, that that's great. I I would love to have you come on another time where we actually take your schema, which you drew out for me, and take it apart and have you explain it piece by piece, just that part. Um, I want to go back to the original question about hearing and reason. And there was something I heard in that question that was probably a lot simpler than what you heard in that question, because you have this whole big picture in your mind. But um, I had a Bible teacher once who told me that in the Old Testament, when the word hearing is used, most often it is used to mean not just what we hear through sound waves coming into our ears, but it actually means to obey. To hear is to obey.
Yeah. That
And
comes up in the Hebrew. Yeah.
so it seems to me as though there is some sense in which music calls forth some kind of obedience,
Mm,
either to obey the music that we're hearing, or to obey the impulse to be transported by the music, or there's some sort of obedience that takes place in our whole physical structure to the music that we hear. So we might be hearing music that's kind of destructive to our being. There's a
right.
lot of that out there, right? But our being is still going to, in some sense, obey it unless we put ourselves into rebel mode. But then there's also music that's very transformative and healing. And if we can allow ourselves to obey that, we get to a different place. So,
Yeah, this is exactly what those guys talk about, the ancient Greeks and stuff, is we call it ethos theory. Uh, Aristotle was an early observer of music as mimetic. And so, oh, well, this song is a dirge. It's meant to make you feel sad. So the proper response is to lament with the music, things like that. Uh, ethos theory was taken so seriously by Plato and people he got ideas from. Well, there's certain scales that have certain tendencies, and those tendencies aren't very good for the Republic. So we're just going to ban those scales. We don't need Ionian. We don't need what was the other one? Lydian. Those will send people into frenzies. We just need Phrygian and we just need Dorian. That's what Plato says. And since we only need Phrygian and Dorian, because those are the only things that bring about moderation and courage when we need it, then we don't need the instruments that can play all those other scales. We only need the instruments that play these scales. So we don't need the flute. Let's just get the flute out of here. We'll keep the lyre because we can just, simplify, you know. Uh, yeah. So I think what you're saying on the hearing and the reason, it's really interesting on what you're saying about obedience and things like that. And I think that's very much in line with what they described about the effect of music on the soul and the ability of music to retune the soul. And um, yeah, I mean, but like literally Boethius says, this is just common knowledge. Like this is just what music does.
yeah, I mean, to me, it was interesting thinking about how often we we can move from the practical to the philosophical, from the obedience to the reason, where we can go off. I mean, I find myself doing this where I can be having the thinky talky thing going on, but meanwhile I really need to go and fold the clothes and get the dinner started. So
Yeah.
there is a balance somewhere between obedience and reason, and
Yeah.
maybe that's what music inhabits, is that balance between obedience and reason.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's really good.
Well, this has been a delight, Drew. Thank you for giving me so much of your time and being able to pick your brain about all this great Greek thought that I didn't even know
I
existed.
I've been needing an outlet, and so because I've it's just been me and my computer screen and reading all these different things and not having a lot of outlet to just sort of verbally process it. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, so tell us just a moment about the impetus behind your Musica Apologia Substack so that we can send people over there to read what you're doing.
Yeah, so music as an apologetic, and I get the term musica apologia. It's a riff on Boethius. He has three levels of music in his model. Uh, the lowest level is musica instrumentalis, which is the music sounds that we hear. And then the level above that is called musica humana, which is that harmony of soul, body, and mind, and it's that harmony of people. And then above that is musica mundana, the music of the spheres, essentially, music of the cosmos. And so for Boethius, that's all music. And so that's sort of where this idea, like he's a huge influence on this thought. Um, and so musica apologia is that thought if we were to incarnate it today in this post-secular context. Because when he wrote that, nobody really questioned that.
Hmm.
It wasn't like it wasn't a matter of science versus faith question.
Hmm.
It wasn't the disenchanted era, but to speak of these things in a post-disenchantment era, it becomes an apologetic at that point. Like it back then it was like rational truth, but today it's it's a defense. It's a it's a reason for the hope that I have. That's where the word apologetics come from, right?
Hmm.
And so that term, the name musica apologia, that's sort of the logical through line. So every article is supposed to just help build that in some sense. Basically, it's rediscovering, uh, in a sense, the meaning of music um, through lenses of all sorts of things. Um, Certainly ethnomusicology because that's my background. That's what got me into this thing. I realized, gosh, there's so much going on with music in the world. There's no way I'm going to learn it all. Um, and and then learning about the mysticism behind it, and then just observing like it's kind of weird that it's just wiggly air. It's like how is this wiggly air like doing such profound things, and people
Hmm.
deify music, and so it's all these observations sort of coalescing into this like, well, no one's really talking about music on that level with specifics, with like um, citing people and being academic about it and taking it seriously. Um,
Hmm.
and I was galvanized by Glenn Scrivener and Justin Brierley when they talked about music and they said it's the unexplored apologetic. I'm like, well, somebody's got to explore it. So that was sort of the impetus. And so I'm only two articles deep, and the last one I published was 2 years ago, and it's been this bridge to nowhere ever since. I have like 30 drafts, and nothing's publishable yet. So I'm just really trying to put it all together. So, but I have a third one hopefully coming out in the next few months.
It seems to me you have enough for about 4 articles just from what we talked about today.
Well, that's what happens is I'll get going and then it becomes four articles, and now I have four drafts instead of one completed one. So, yeah.
That is the problem with what we're doing, right? I mean, I'll I'll wake up in the morning, I'll hear something and I'll think that's what I'm going to focus on today. And then I hear something else and then I it's the tyranny of the interesting shiny thing that's just on the other side of the screen. Yeah.
Well, thanks
Well,
again, Karen.
thanks. Have a wonderful
Yeah.
day. We'll talk again soon.
Yeah, we'll catch you online.
Okay. Bye-bye.